hi Jodie, hi Laura. Everybody's commenting, and here's Alistair.
Hello. I was just messaging saying, I'm here.
It's great to see you, Alistair.
It's more impressive to see your TTS background, which is shamefully glorious for a Thursday evening.
It definitely beats the cold November outside, doesn't it? We have our own magical indoor experience here, so it's definitely much nicer.
And this has been my lockdown background for about 18 months now, and people keep messaging me saying, like, where are you? I'm like, I'm in my house. Somebody messaged me to say, are they swimming lockers? Are you in the baths? I was like, no, I'm not in the swimming baths. That's not where I do my kind of Instagramming from the swimming bath.
It's a place to know, isn't it?
Very, very dull compared to yours. What I can't do is open the cupboards because there's about 20 years worth of children's collected detritus just kind of pushed in there with the door shut. So if we open the cupboards, it would all kind of come out.
As it all does, it's somewhere to store it all. It's that much. You need somewhere.
Especially when you've got three big boys like I've got that just literally shove. Tidying up just means shove it in a space where nobody can see it. In a cupboard, under a bed, in a wardrobe. Yeah. So our house is full of stuff like that.
Oh, that's amazing. I've got a little girl and all she just loves doing at the moment is posting. Everything's got to be posted into the tiniest little holes, and she's got a little pretend keys that she goes around and put them into every hole she can find. So it's a joy.
But at least you're of the age where you haven't got like a video recorder like we had, where you find toast and crackers just being posted through the little hole in the bottom of the video recorder. Like, exactly. What's a video recorder?
No, I do know what that is, thankfully.
Yes, make me feel ancient.
Videos, don't worry. I think we're just waiting for finishing up for people to join, which is super exciting. And I think we are ready to start, Alistair. I think we've got plenty of friends following us now.
Great, good stuff.
So I'm here today to welcome Alistair alongside TTS, and he's going to answer some of your absolutely fantastic questions that you've posted to us, all about your worries or your concerns that you might have over the new EYFS framework. We've had some great questions come in, so I'm going to be able to pose them to Alistair, and hopefully he'll be able to ease all of your minds. So my name is Kamilla, and I work for TTS, and I'm one of the early years in-house educators and one of the people that develops all the wonderful resources that we sell.
Well, it's great for me to be here, Kamilla, and whether I will answer everybody's questions or not, I don't know. And we've had loads come in beforehand, which has been great. And obviously you've got the chat feature. So if anybody's got any questions that they've got as we are chatting, then you can stick them in the chat and we'll be monitoring that as we go along. And it's nice to see a face behind the brand, Kamilla, because obviously I know TTS really well. I've been part of the TTS family now for probably about 10 years, off and on. But I think it's really nice. We see, obviously, the brochures that come into settings with all the fantastic resources in, but it's really nice to see the people who make it all happen, where the exciting stuff is.
Yeah, I'm one of an amazing team that comes together with all of our joint collective knowledge working in the early years. I myself was a nursery nurse for 10 years. So it's just been an amazing journey to work with TTS to really think about some fantastic resources that are really aligned to children's development. And it's not just some random person in a suit sitting behind a desk.
And yeah, who knew one day at the peak of your career you'd be sitting in front of some milk crates in a fantasy world on a Thursday night talking about
on a Thursday night. Yeah, it wasn't on my list of things to do, but I'm glad it's here.
Exactly.
Right, I think we might be ready for our first question.
Okay.
So this first one's been sent in by Carol from Little Flames, and she's asking, there has been a discrepancy with other settings in our area regarding not needing to implement next steps for each child using the new EYFS. We are still continuing with this at our setting as it's part of extending their learning and development journey. Could you please clarify this for me?
Well, I'll do my best, because I think with loads of the settings that I've been working with since the implementation of the new framework, This is the thing that lots of people are talking about around observation, assessment, next steps, learning journeys, tapestry, seesaw, all of the usual bits that people use. And basically, the new framework is supposed to free, or the intention is it frees practitioners up so that we're not spending loads of time working on paperwork. And, you know, when you're as old as I am, and you've lived through kind of many iterations of the framework. I mean, I remember a time where every child would have half of a plastic poly wallet that would be stuck to the wall with their photograph. And you had to do an observation of each child in every area, every half term. And you wrote them all down and you put post-it notes and all sorts of stuff in their poly wallet. And then at the holidays, you took the poly wallets home and sat and wrote up all of your observations, some of which might have been from 4 or 5 weeks ago that were completely meaningless. And you seem to spend an awful lot of time writing up stuff that wasn't relevant. Or we'd do learning journeys, which are great. We'll talk about those a bit later on. But you'd spend, or like my TA, Carol, would spend a Thursday afternoon sticking in learning journeys, and that was her job on a Thursday afternoon. So again, what the documentation is realizing is that when we're spending all of this time carrying out what we feel is required assessment and observation of children, it means that we spend a lot of time away from children, or we view them through an iPad or through the lens of, oh, I need to get an observation of that, I need to get an observation of that. So what the documentation is clear about now is that observation is really there to do if it informs something important and useful. So you don't have to observe every child in every area. You don't have to have 3 pieces of evidence written for every observation that you make. And in terms of next steps, what did happen was that in terms of development matters, it was, even though it says on the bottom of every page, please do not use this as a tracking document, it became a really reliable source for a lot of practitioners to think, well, my child is in this age band, this is what's coming next, that's the next step, so we'll move from here to there. But what that did was narrow our vision a bit, and not all settings, but some settings just began to stick to that kind of development matters ladder and highlight their way through it. So the new documentation and the new development matters is basically saying we want to take away that practitioners' feeling of need to just track their way through development matters and take it all back to child development, spending time with children, observing, talking with your team, if you've got a team, about things that are important, noticing again, recording what's important, and then articulating that. But Development Matters, the revised version, the original Development Matters, Birth to 5, are all non-statutory documents. So in theory, you can use any document that you choose in your setting to support you and your team in helping children to achieve their potential in terms of the early years framework. So you can, if you want as a setting, refer back to the original Development Matters, but there's a huge kind of word of caution that says don't use it as a tracker, because it was never meant to be a tracker. And if you do use it as a tracker, you are missing some of the other bits that we probably should be noticing around children's development. So we do need to notice where our children are at through observation and assessment. We do need to plan to move those children forward, so what we would have called next steps. But what we don't need to do in the way that we did was to say, a child is here, I'm going to write out the next step of where they will go to, and now they're here, we're going to write out the next step that they will go to. When Ofsted come to visit, and not that we do this for Ofsted, but Ofsted will make judgments about how well they perceive our practice to be, they will not ask any practitioner for any paperwork at all. The only recording you're required to do is the 2-year-old check and the foundation stage profile. So how you choose to record, what you need to record in terms of noticing children and recording progress, is completely up to you. And so there may well be discrepancy between settings, because some might say, we would still like to record more information because this is where my team are and this is how we feel secure. And others will be saying, we are not recording very much information at all in the way that we used to, but we can articulate what we know in different ways. And again, Ofsted have been really clear, and they've documented that when they come to visit your setting, they will want you to articulate what you know about children, how you know it, their point of entry is, how you know that, and how you can explain how your environment has been structured to support that development. They are not looking for learning journeys. They're not looking for planning and assessment folders. They're not looking for curriculum maps that map what you're doing onto the national curriculum, Key Stage 1 or Key Stage 2. They're looking for practitioners who can talk about their knowledge of children and in some depth. But if you choose as a setting to have a particular method of recording, that's about you choosing something that suits the team that you have got currently. But if you do talk to me, senior leaders, local authority, Ofsted, about what you do in terms of recording, you might be asked how that takes you away from your interaction with children. So if I said, well, what we decided to do was under the new document, we've stayed to tracking, we've stayed to next steps, we've stayed to learning journeys, we've stayed to doing all the things that we did before, the question would be asked, A, in terms of your work-life balance, how does that work? Are you not constantly doing paperwork? And B, that sounds like an awful lot of paperwork. When are you doing that? Because if you're doing it during taught time or interaction time with the children, that's time you could be spent actually in the space interacting with those children. So the answer is, we've been given a huge amount of choice. And for lots of people, that's been a great release. Like, great, we've got choice, we can do what we want. But for an equal number of people, it's a bit like having the rug pulled out from under you, because they've been very used to quite a structured way of observing, recording, reporting. And now they're being told you don't have to do that anymore. You can just do whatever you think is best. And realistically, for some settings, they're not quite sure what's best because they're not quite sure what you can do outside of what they're used to. So this is really about having discussions with your team, trying things, revisiting things, seeing what works, but fundamentally being able to articulate how you know where your children are and what you are doing to help them to make progress. Roughly.
That's a great answer there, Alistair. Thank you so much. It leads us really nicely on to our next question from Debbie from Berkhamsted School. And she's asking, how are people recording their assessment observations and what evidence of assessment are the inspectors looking for?
So again, inspectors are looking for articulation of. So basically, if I was an Ofsted inspector, which I'm not, but I work with lots of them, if I was coming into an early years space, I would probably sit with the early years subject lead or with an early years practitioner, and often, obviously, with a head teacher or senior leader, and ask them to talk about attainment in their setting. So tell me about your children. How do they come in? How do they come in this year? What is the usual, intake that you get where your setting serves? What issues do they bring with them? What strengths do they bring with them? And when we're talking about the early years curriculum, which again for lots of people is new language, the early years curriculum is not subject based. It's not a watered down version of the national curriculum. So it's not based on kind of history, geography, science. And nor, as I said before, and again, I've also been really clear about this, they do not need to see curriculum maps, because I work with lots of early years practitioners who are running themselves ragged trying to write out curriculum maps and they're not even quite sure what they are. So the early years curriculum is saying, look at what's in the document, look at the 7 educational programs, look at your children, and then the 7 educational programs are the kind of bedrock of the kind of universal curriculum. But then there should be, in your unique curriculum, lots of elements that you bring in that your children need. Because I work in loads of schools, some in, well, all very diverse, some in areas of high social deprivation, others not. So the needs of the children in one school can be drastically different from the basic needs of children in another school, around things like health and self-care, around things like resilience, around things like opportunity. So therefore, my curriculum in one school would be rich in a lot of experiences that possibly it wouldn't be in another school. So there'll be a core, which are the educational programs that run through it, but there should be elements that make it unique to you. So when we're talking about observation and assessment, again, the general rule of thumb is observe something that is significant. So if it's significant, use it as an observation, use it as a tool that's going to help inform your planning or inform the team. But don't go around with your clipboard just looking for opportunities to observe. Now, somebody said to me the other day, apparently we're not allowed, which is a funny use of the word allowed, we're not allowed to observe anymore. And of course, we're allowed to observe, because that's how actually we learn most about children. When I'm working with a setting or in a setting, when I sit or stand usually and just watch children at play, that's when I learn most about how the setting works, about, you know, staff interaction with the children, how they use the environment. So it's never a case of being told we're not going to observe anymore. It's just about saying we're observing being present with the children. So it's not that we're observing with a sheet or observing through an iPad. It's observation that takes place through interaction, really. So an exchange, a moment, or a standing back and a watching. So to answer the question about what are people doing, I can say, even working recently with a trust, which has got 6 schools, and even though it's a trust, within those 6 schools, they're all doing something quite different in terms of how they are observing and assessing and recording, and also in terms of planning. But that's got to do with the teams in the schools. So where there's a lot of confidence around child development and a lot of security in the early years foundation stage, because somebody's done it for quite a long time, they are finding it much, much easier to be intuitive. But where somebody's maybe new to early years or has just moved in or not done it for very long, they are perhaps feel more secure with a little bit more structure. So therefore, you know, if somebody came down and asked you a question, you would have something to refer to help you to give that answer. Because what we're also not trying to do is to say, right, you're not allowed to write anything down anymore either. So you've got to keep all of that knowledge in your head all of the time, just in case somebody comes down and says, right, tell me about Chloe. Tell me where she is in terms of her speech and language development. How was she 3 Tuesdays ago? Nobody's going to be, hopefully saying that to you, but not expecting to keep that knowledge in your head. It's about the idea that you share the kind of knowledge responsibility around the team, so that everybody has a buy-in to where children are at in terms of their development, and that you are able to tell a story of how children are developing and progressing within your space. So one really interesting thing that I did last week or the week before around this with a setting was that we talked about the journey of 3 children through their space. So what we'd said was, rather than writing anything down, we want the team to get really comfortable with articulating attainment around a space. So outside of the adult, so outside of saying, well, we did a phonics session and I differentiated and they were able to answer these questions and I think they're there in terms of their phonic development. This is about saying, right, if I am Alfie and I come into your space, tell me about Alfie. Tell me about what he likes. Tell me about what he doesn't like. Tell me about how you have represented Alfie in your environment. So what have you got where that you know he's going to really like and interact with? Right, so he loves the construction. So tell me about Alfie and construction. Right, also what he's really good at that. So he can do that and that's really comfortable for him. So how are you taking that forward? Talk to me about how you consolidate his skills. Talk to me about how you rehearse those skills. Talk to me about how you might extend those skills. So we would just basically take Alfie's journey, a real child with a real personality, through the space, and then it was like, okay, now talk to me about Chloe. Where does she sit in this space? How have you represented Chloe? What does she like? Where can I see Chloe on the wall? Where can I see Chloe's voice? Is there anything in this space that really represents her particular interests outside of topic, outside of your usual resources? Is there anything that's in this space that's about Chloe? So we worked on that for quite a while, and what they found was there was a really useful way of getting into the swing of saying how I can tell somebody who doesn't inhabit this space how this space and play is linked to the attainment of my children, and how I can articulate their progress in phonics and maths, but I can also articulate their progress through play. And then you start to build in methods of observation and assessment recording that are minimal but give you hooks to hang that information on. So what we did in this particular space was a little bit of a gap and strength analysis. So when the children first came in, they were observed and assessed for about 6 weeks. And then we created an environment plan, which was based on the observation assessment. So I was able to say to the team, tell me about how you've observed and assessed. And they've told me about the process. And then they said, and I can talk you through my space and I can link it directly to that observation assessment I've just told you about. And then we talked about how they personalized the space. So how they enhanced it around children's interests, but also around topic and theme. So they were giving themselves little hooks to hang their assessment hats on. And when we came to talk about it, which is what we've been asked to do, they were just going along those hooks and then talking about the things that were hanging off them. And that's what gave them their assessment observation story, with minimal recording, either through note taking or a lot through photographs. And that was it. For them, no learning journeys anymore, because they've chosen not to do that. But that doesn't mean to say that you can't. You can absolutely keep a learning journey if it's not too time consuming and it's going to be useful.
Yeah, that's a great answer, Alistair. Thank you very much. Just really quickly, we've had a couple of comments in asking if this is being recorded. Don't worry, Alistair and I are definitely being recorded, so you can access this at some point later on. We've got a team that will be uploading it onto our social media on TTS, so have no concerns, don't worry about that. That's great, Alistair. It really leads on to another question that we've had that comes in that's really asking about, now we're writing longer observations that include how we move the children's education forward. So long observations with more content. How many per week are we supposed to do?
Okay, so there's loads in there. The short answer is, how long is a piece of string? So if you're doing a longer observation, then different settings are doing it in different ways. Again, I need to go back to the fact that you're only writing long observations if they're going to be useful. So if you're looking at an assessment system like Opal, where they're talking about things like spotlighting children, what they basically mean by that, and I'm paraphrasing what they do in terms of the principle, but it's that you, rather than trying to observe children on a daily basis and write down those observations, on a cycle, you will spotlight children and have, to quote Ofsted, a deep dive on particular children and really look at where they're at. And often key adults can do that with different children in the space. And then you use the information that you've gleaned from that kind of spotlight to then plan the provision and plan the engagement, activities, resources that go until the next kind of spotlight comes. It's not that you don't ever observe them again, you're constantly watching them and observing them, but they've got features rather than this constant. So if you're doing longer in-depth observations like a spotlight or something similar, it's about the content of that observation and how that is going to carry you forward with information that's going to inform your planning, your interaction, your environment, that sort of thing. As to how many you do, it's a really rubbish answer, because I know I would want somebody to say, right, I reckon you do 3 a week per child, and then you think, okay, I know what I'm doing. But the idea is you do a longer observation. It's really rich, the information you get from that long observation. You use that information until you need to go and do another longer deep dive observation. So depending on the child, and as we know, children don't all progress on a beautiful linear path. There will be some that have like little rapid moments of progress, some that kind of plateau for a little while. So observations for some children will give you lots of information that will last longer, and some it will be shorter, and some things will change. So there is no easy answer, and there is no requirement. As long as you can articulate that children are making progress and how they're making progress, whether you do 1 observation or 16 observations, doesn't really matter. But if you were doing 16 observations, somebody might say, right, talk to me about how long you're spending observing and recording and how long you're spending working with children. Because the joy, if we can say the joy of the revised framework, is the permission to spend more time playing with children. And if we believe that play is a vehicle for learning, and if we believe that play is developmentally appropriate way of children learning, which we do, then the more time you've got to interact with that, then the better it is both for you and for the children.
No, that's great, Alistair. I think we all recognise that play with children is the most important thing. And when you've created meaningful experiences for children, you know that just by observing them in that, they're going to get an absolute ton of learning experience from all areas of the EYFS, which is fantastic. It does lead us on to another brilliant question. We've got quite a few great ones. And this one's really talking about how you've already mentioned about tracking children without having the month bands, but what do we assess them against? Is it purely the early learning goals and whether they are on track to meet this at the end of the year?
So fundamentally, again, the short answer is yes. So we are still in a kind of outcomes driven education system. So for me, one of the sad things really was that even though the push in terms of the framework is that there's not a requirement for as much paperwork, it's just about child development, interaction. Ultimately, there are still these early learning goals at the end of the process, which everybody, who especially who's in reception, is under some pressure to achieve those early learning goals. Because still, schools are judged, whether that's internally or externally, and even some staff feel judged by the percentage of children who they get to achieve those early learning goals. So what that can result in sometimes is a narrowing of experience, because you begin to get a little bit of it's like spring term panic in reception, that you know where your children are and you know what that goal is, especially that one for kind of writing, and you know that unless you do some focused intervention work, children aren't going to get anywhere near where you want it to be. So it stops sometimes being that more holistic approach and starts being a bit like, right, everybody, let's do our 4th phonics session today, stay on the carpet because we're going to get you to that early learning goal. But ultimately, all we're being asked to do is to look at those early learning goals and make a statement of whether our children are working towards them, at them, or for some children they will have gone beyond them. So yeah, that's what we are assessing against. So in the between times, that's why the new development matters has got these really broad streams that have hugely opened up, and we haven't got these month by month bands. So that what underpins that strategy, and again, that's non-statutory documentation, but the kind of pedagogy that underpins it is that we need to be tracking child development in a more personal way to the child and not just linking it to those development ladders. So lots of people are using many and various tools to assess. Some are looking at the new documentation and having broader sweeps on their assessment. Some are looking at other assessment documents. Some settings I'm working with are finding it really hard to step away from development matters because they've done it for as long as they can remember. But I think ultimately the aim is that you would try and step away from that and see it not as a kind of ladder of assessment, but to see it as a structure that supports child development. And ultimately what I think we're going to get is that we as a profession will move way more back towards a stronger understanding of the principles of child development, which can get lost along the way because when people sometimes join our profession, it becomes very much about kind of phonics schemes, math schemes, and sometimes a little bit of tracking through development matters. And therefore, there's not a requirement to be taught or have the depth of knowledge around child development. And I think what this documentation hopefully will do is to guide us back towards that. But that period of change is a period of change and transition, and it is going to be difficult, and it is a bit foggy for lots of people, but that's okay. You're not alone if you feel in the fog or a slight bit of discomfort, but from that should come much stronger practice.
Change is always difficult for the best of us. It's always great to have opportunities like this, Alistair, where people can get all their questions hopefully answered. We've had quite a few questions pop up on the chat bar and that have been sent in as well, saying for the EYFS, how should schools track this progress? I know that links in with what you were mentioning with the early learning goals.
Well, the short answer is track it how you like, but that's not always the best answer. So I know you're kind of saying that people have their questions answered, but sometimes with the revised framework, there isn't a definitive answer, and we're moving from a a time when people might have said, use development matters or use whatever it may be. And now we're moving into a time where we're saying, in terms of how do you track progress? Well, there are all sorts of non-statutory guides like Birth to Five, Development Matters, that do talk about child development and progress, but not in the same way as we have been used to. So in terms of how you track it, you would use documentation like that or similar to support the tracking of children, but how you implement that within your own setting or school is completely up to you. And some people are still using things that they've used previously, like Seesaw, Tapestry, Target Tracker, because that's their school's assessment system. And that's okay. If that's what your school is choosing to use, nobody's going to criticize you for that, as long as you're not spending lots of time as a practitioner just generating information to feed assessment, but you are spending more time with children. But there isn't a definitive to how do we track. You track by your knowledge of child development and use those non-statutory guidance resources to support you with that.
No, that's brilliant. Thank you so much. Moving on to another question. Kirsty has asked about the new EYFS is going towards less paperwork. What are the expectations for learning journeys now and formal observations? How do we present this? I know you've touched on this very slightly.
So again, it's an up to you one. And I get that with this comes lots of freedom, but also lots of frustration. So some settings have dropped the learning journey completely in the way that it was. Some settings had moved to a digital learning journey. Some were still doing paper. Some were on a tracking system. So there's been many and various versions of a learning journey. But you've got to think, what was a learning journey for? So in an ideal scenario, a learning journey was used to articulate the unique journey of every child. So there was a time when I would have worked with settings and we would have got out 30 learning journeys, and we literally could have gone page 1, same picture, different version, turn it over, page 2, potato print, turn it over, page 3. So those learning journeys were everybody did the same activity and we stuck it in their book, and it was a record of activities carried out across the year. Then we transitioned from that into early years is all about the unique journey of the unique child. And if that's the truth, then every learning journey should be different, because what's relevant or meaningful for one child is not the same for another. So there might be some similarities, but what I should be able to do is get 2 learning journeys and in theory, turn them over and none of the pages be the same, because it's not relevant for 2 children to be in the same space. But we use learning journeys to show children's unique journey. We also often use them to articulate progress to parents. And then we had a shift into a digital age where the paper learning journey was kept by some people, and often it's kept by adults because they love it. And if you're an adult who's got children and you've got your children's learning journeys, and if they're now in their 20s or late teens like mine are, and they're thankless, obnoxious older adults, you look back at these gorgeous little paper books with slightly curled edges that have got beautiful paintings, and you look back at them in front of us and think, I just love having this because it reminds you of time gone by. But actually, it probably took some adult who work with my boys hours of their life sticking things into jotters. And so again, what we're saying is, although that is a lovely in terms of sentiment, if we looked at the impact on children's development by you sticking something into a jotter is minimal, that time could have been spent in a one-to-one interaction with children. So we've got to kind of take the sentiment out of it slightly and think, right, what is a learning journey for? If we are going to track the journey of this unique child to their unique learning, how do we articulate that? And it's not through an iPad for us, and it's not through a jotter. It's through lots of different means of articulating, verbalizing, some recording, some photographs, whatever it may be. So learning journeys can exist if you feel they are valid and if you can justify their existence, but they don't have to exist. All that needs to exist is somebody's ability to articulate the unique learning journey of each child in their setting. So if I came and said, tell me about Alfie, and tell me about his journey through reception or nursery or whatever it may be, somebody could say, right, this is where we start, this is where we end, and this is what happened in the middle, and that's enough.
It's about knowing your child, isn't it? Knowing all the wonderful children that you get to care for every day.
Yeah.
That's the most important thing. And having the time to spend with them.
Yeah, and recording some pivotal moments. But again, the kind of difficult bit is how you record them is up to you. And in theory, if you don't record them, but you can verbalize it and you show a deep knowledge of that child, then that's also okay. So there is no statutory requirement other than 2-year-old check and early years foundation stage profile in terms of paperwork.
That's great. Thank you, Alistair. We've got another question here, and this is somebody who's asking all about how they don't understand why shape and addition and subtraction has left the EYFS.
So it hasn't left, it's just moved house, as it were. So in terms of the educational programs, shape, space and measure has disappeared as an educational program, but as an area of learning, but it exists within the mathematics educational program. So of course, we're never not going to teach shape, space and measure. It is all around you. But what it hasn't really now has got its own headline. It's just part of a wider band. So it's not gone solo, it's joined the maths band. A bit like Jessie from Little Mix, but in reverse. So it's come in rather than left. So we absolutely teach shape, space and measure, and we assess it under mathematics, and it should be there, it should be in your curriculum, it should be in your environment. And again, really interestingly, on our journey as early years practitioners, one of the things that's really good to get to spend some time doing is getting your head round the kind of what comes before. So what do children need to know to become mathematicians? What do children need to know to become readers and writers? So the end goal bit, we know what the early learning goals kind of tell us what's at the end. So what I do a lot of work with settings around is, we know what the end is. Can you talk to me about how you're going to get there? And not how you've got there before necessarily, but the things that we know underpin phonic development, the things that we know underpin mathematical development. What I asked for a setting to do for me a little while back was to take all of the obvious maths out of their space. So no maths table, no number lines, no gel numbers, no number molds in the sand. So we took all the obvious maths out. And I said, I'm coming back in 3 weeks. When I come back, can you talk me through your play provision? And can you talk me through the opportunities for mathematical development that don't look like maths? So no tape measures, no weighing scales. For the purpose of the exercise, they're not banned. And what we were able to do with our team, which was great, was I came back, looked at this lovely play space, and they're like, right, we've looked at the things that underpin mathematical development. So when we're talking about number, this is what's in our space. When I'm talking about counting and cardinality, this is what's in the space. When we talk about shape, space and measure, this is how we're doing it. When we talk about pattern, this is how we're doing it. So they managed to talk me through the entire development of mathematical concept in a space that had no obvious maths in it. And we didn't say you can't use maths in this space, but their understanding of what made maths was massive. So then we started to do that around what comes before phonics, and look at things like print-rich environments and metalinguistics and opportunities to kind of talk. And so trying to make sure that the team understand what underpins the end point can really help to shape that space. And also, if I know that for children to be really successful mathematicians, they've got to be good at compartmentalization, they've got to be good at counting, they've got to be good at cardinal numbers, then when I'm in play, I'm not going to be saying, right, stop what you're doing. If I've got 3 apples in this hand, how many apples have I got in that hand? I'm not going to be doing that. But in my interaction with children, I am going to be talking about sets and groups and numbers and how many have we got in the ball and how many are not in the ball and all this kind of stuff. And I know, because I've thought about how the space has been structured, that these concepts are crucial. They're going to really empower children to make progress, and they're part of my play space. So I don't have to have a maths table or a tough spot with a maths activity on it. My maths doesn't exist like that. It's part of the fibre of what we are within our space. And if you as an adult can have anybody come into your classroom and say, right, before we start, can I just talk you through my observation and assessment of the children on point of entry? Can I just tell you how that then translates into my space and why I've got this area and why I haven't got that area? And then can I talk you through the basic principles of literacy and numeracy and how they're represented in my space? And I don't have a writing table and I haven't got a maths area, but can I tell you about this? And then can I talk to you about the role of the adult and how we facilitate this? And then can I talk about enhancements? And then I'm saying, well, bloody hell, pardon my French, you know your children really well. And actually what you're doing is maximizing the potential for attainment through play, because your play-based space is underpinned by rigor around child development, rigor around mathematical development, rigor around language development. It looks like play, it feels like play, but it's really structured around the essential elements that build effective learning. That's where we're kind of aiming towards. And then when we're saying, how do we assess and what do we assess? Well, then you think, well, this gets much easier, because what I'm doing now is assessing what I've put in my space and how those children are interacting with that space and whether they're grasping it, learning it for the first time, rehearsing it. Am I extending it when I'm talking to the rest of the team and we're talking about particular concepts around mathematics or subitizing or whatever it may be? How are we consolidating that? How are we extending that? Do we have that in the creative area? So if I've got a child that loves to glue and stick sparkly pom-poms but never goes near construction, is there a skill transfer there? If I've got a child in construction that never goes into the small world, is there a skill transfer there? So am I encouraging their development through different areas of provision? So then assessment becomes easier because you're assessing what you've built your space upon.
Yeah, that's amazing. I think your biggest key point there was that maths should be underpinned in all your areas, and you know, with fantastic staff to bring it in naturally to the children. We're going to take a little step back here. We've had a question come in from Carla, who's asked, what if a key person leaves? How will other staff know where the child is in their development?
Well, ideally, what I'm not doing is walking around looking at my children thinking, they're my children, don't look at my children, don't speak about my children, they're my children, back off, do not come near my children. So if with a key person, the idea is that they have key responsibility. Well, it depends how you use the key person role. So sometimes the key person in a setting is responsible for almost the administration of the child. So, you know, where are they? What are they doing? You know, have they got their coat pegs, all that kind of stuff. And then there's a key person role or a key adult role that's responsible for making that connection with that child. And again, interestingly, some settings I work with will split the children equally among the adults that are in there. So if there are 2 adults and 30 children, you get 15 each. Other settings I work with go through a period of kind of getting to know you for the first however many weeks of the year, and then they let the children choose, which is really fascinating. It kind of gets to the core of what key adult is supposed to be about, which is the emotional bond that you make with an adult. But you can always spot who the miserable adult is because they've got no key children, and you can always spot who the happy adult is because they've got 29 key children. So different settings are very diverse in how they use this function. But fundamentally, the idea of a key person is somebody that's got a connection with a child and therefore is responsible for that child's development. So I would never expect a key person to be in isolation of the rest of the team. So they should know and share lots of key elements and key moments about their children. And if somebody was leaving in a planned departure, you would hope there'd be a handover. If somebody was unexpectedly left or was unable to come in, then in the worst case scenario, you as a practitioner would pick up that child where they were and you would begin the process of getting to know you where you are now and take you forward from there. But ideally, you don't want key children to be in isolation with one key person. And we're not saying nobody's ever going to write anything down ever again about a child. So there will be some documentation around photographs, little bits of video, maybe some key moments recorded, maybe some deep dive assessments. One setting I'm working in, they do a letter to every half term, and I just love it. And what they do is their key group the adult writes the child a letter every half term, and it's not an assessment, it's a, "Dear Alfie, today we played together in the construction. It was great. I mailed a tall tower. You kicked it down. You told me that your favourite food is beans. You told me that you want to be a fireman when you grow up. I love working with you because..." And they're just lovely letters that anecdotally record where these children are up to. So even, some letters too. There are various ways that you can share what you know about children that isn't just the old style of tick sheet recording.
No, that's lovely. I think that was a great way to phrase that.
That's really lovely. It was really lovely.
We've having loads of fantastic questions in the chat box, and just want to say a big thank you to everybody. And obviously, Alistair won't be able to answer them all for you right now, but he'll definitely, and we'll all definitely be able to support in answering them out later for you all and having them appear on our social channels. So we've got a couple more questions left to go, but just wanted to pop that on there because all of this is being recorded and hopefully no one's questions will be lost or left behind. So we've got one here from Lisa, and it's a question that I think from a lot of people in the chat boxes are saying, how do we know what we're doing is right?
It's a really difficult answer because the answer is not because Ofsted tell you so. So that's the fundamental principle is got to try and move away from doing it for Ofsted, and we get panicked, or not we, a lot of people understandably get panicked by the thought of Ofsted coming and what they're going to ask. So how do you know what you're doing is right? Okay, I would say, are your children happy? Are they making progress? Do you have positive relationships with their parents, the adults, carers? And I know that's not always easy, and for settings sometimes that work really hard at that, and that's still not easy. Are you as a team feeling like you are in control, or do you feel like you've jumped off a cliff without a parachute and you're free falling? And if you are free falling, that's okay. The adage that says it's okay not to feel okay, that equally applies to this. There's a change in documentation. A lot of structure has been taken away, and that is a positive. And when we get to a position where you feel like that's a positive, then you know you're winning. But in the meantime, if you really do feel like you're free falling and you just don't know what's going on, then take what's laid out in the new documentation, look at what you did before that gave you some security, question that idea of it was all about tick boxes, highlighting, I spent loads of my time sticking things in books, and try and find a hybrid model that allows you to feel like you know what you're doing. Because if we get adults in our profession who feel like they don't know what they're doing, so therefore are not happy in their work, they're not going to have happy children. So we don't want to go backwards. We want to move towards the new documentation, but start from a place of security with the intention of moving forward. That's very different from saying, well, this is where we are. I've done this since 1972, so I shall carry on doing it. That's not what we're saying. But nor am I saying, oh, just throw all your paperwork out and engage with the children in this space and it'll all be fine by the summer. Because it won't be fine because you don't feel fine. So if you want to know if you're doing it right, happy children, making progress, happy staff who feel like they are doing something that they understand. And what you should feel like for me is that the fire in your belly has been lit again, because no longer do you have to spend your weekends filling out ridiculous planning formats that nobody looks at. No longer are you still at school at 6 o'clock with a highlighter trying to track somebody through development matters. No longer are you sitting through your Easter holiday sticking things into flaming jotters for learning journeys. What you're doing is being in a space with children who are going to say ridiculous things that make you laugh, that surprise you, that shock you. And you're suddenly like, whoa, this is why we did this in the first place. This is not about a thing on a string. This is not about sitting on the carpet for 30 minutes doing phonics. This is about me in construction, being a superhero baddie and having a baddie kingdom and engaging in some really good interaction, language development, social play, dramatic play, maths, all while playing goodies and baddies prison with these children on this carpet. This is the best job in the world. So that's when, for me, you think, right, am I doing it right? Yeah, this feels like I'm doing it right.
I think if you're not having fun, they're not having fun, and then they're not doing anything. And so I just want to say there's been loads of people saying that the letter idea that you mentioned was absolutely amazing and they want to try it too. So that's always great. You mentioned about planning, and Gemma from Fawley Infant School, she's heard a few mixed messages about the expectations of planning. Some are saying you have to plan an entire curriculum mapped out for each individual, showing small steps in progress, and just planning in general, what should it look like?
So there's a lot of myth and legend out there in terms of planning. Ofsted have actually produced a document that's on their site, which is a myth buster around planning. That's definitely worth having a look at. I know we don't do this for Ofsted, but that's what people will be concerned about. If Ofsted are coming to your setting, they will not look at your planning. That's not part of their inspection remit. So it doesn't matter what you do, it's for you. So always, planning should have been a useful document for you. For me, when I do planning with early years, what I find really the most useful is what we'd call retrospective planning. So on a short-term level, it's about what happened that you didn't think of, because that's where the important nuggets come out of. If you are literally filling in boxes and then tracking your way through the boxes, you can't be reactive in your planning, therefore you can't be reactive to children's development. So often we will look at having a planning format which has got some discrete subjects on it. So you know what you're teaching in your phonics if you're doing phonics, you know what you're teaching in your maths if you're doing your maths. You'll know what your adult inputs are likely to be. But in terms of things like your continuous provision, your children's interests, your enhancements, they can be quite reactive. And again, it can be getting used to this style of planning where you might be going in on a Monday thinking, I would normally have my whole week planned, literally from start to finish. I'm now going in with my kind of discrete basic skills planned and not a lot else. I'm not doing what I used to do, which was it's autumn, let's all make a hedgehog out of some clay and stick some matchsticks in it. I'm not doing what I used to, which is we're doing the rainbow fish, so we're all going to paint a rainbow fish. What I'm doing now is we're all going to paint, but how you interpret paint is up to you. Yes, it's autumn, but we're not all going to paint the back of a leaf in orange, yellow or red or brown paint and print with it. We might explore printing, but if you want to print with the feet of a dinosaur, or you want to print with the tracks of a car, or you want to print with whatever you find, that's okay. So we're now beginning to be more reactive. We know the skills that we're planning for, we know the experiences we want children to have, but we're not being as themed or as planned as we maybe once were. So in terms of how much planning do you need to support you in doing your job and feeling confident? Because that's how much planning you need to do. So there isn't a general rule of thumb. And sometimes, I work with some settings where it's multi-form entry. And so I'm working with the school at the moment with 3 reception classes, and all 3 teachers do a different style and level of planning because it's their unique planning for their children in their class. And so what they've got are different themes emerging in the 3 classes because the children are interested in different things. So even though they're all in the same school, they're not all doing People That Help Us, or they're not all doing celebrations. They're doing things that their children are finding interesting. So their planning is quite diverse, but the level of progress is brilliant and the teaching and learning is fantastic.
No, that's brilliant. It kind of leads on to this next question from, when you walk into an early setting, what are the first things that you expect to see? So if we're not planning like we used to, what do you expect to see?
So it's not that we're not planning at all. So there'll definitely be adult directed sessions. If you say, even for example, you want children in, let's go back to the leaf printing example. I would have done, I did do, it's autumn, we're all going to print with a leaf in autumn colours, which I will pre-select, and that's what we're going to do. So I would now not do that, would be my choice. I would get children to experiment with paint, and just because it's autumn doesn't mean to say you have to have an autumn palette. You can have any colour you want, because I'm thinking about autumn, but you're 4. You might not be interested in autumn. You might be thinking about the Hulk, in which case you want a colour that I haven't got on my palette. But I would still need to demonstrate to you how to mix paint, how to use a brush, how to cut with a pair of scissors, how to mix your own dough, how to scoop with a jug, how to pour. So there are lots of things that adults will scaffold around children, so mainly skills and experiences. What I would step away from is the idea that all children do something with an end result. So Christmas is coming, and again, people who know me well will know it's my favourite time of year, but not my favourite time of year within settings. Because again, as a head of a school, we did a Christmas cracker out of a toilet roll tube. We did celebrations in another toilet roll tube with cotton wool balls stuck on it. We did a salt door decoration and a Christmas card. And all of those things were done by every child to take home. And we started basically about the third week in September and worked all our way through to November, chucking a nativity for 90 children in each year group. And what you got by the time we got to Christmas were adults who were literally crying and drinking vodka in the stock cupboards, and no work was getting done because everybody was sitting in the classrooms trying to finish off their salt door decorations. So we made a decision that actually that wasn't what our role was as educators. And so we didn't do nativities anymore. We did other celebrations around the festival of Christmas, but we didn't do the big shebang nativity. We didn't make the salt door decoration. We didn't do everybody takes home a Christmas card. We did a there's the creative table. You know how to be creative. If you want to make a card, make one. If you don't, then you don't want to make a card. So no child said, oh, you've ruined Christmas, because I wanted to sit every afternoon for 2 weeks making a salt door decoration that I wasn't even interested in the first place. But we did have a couple of parents that said, oh, you've ruined Christmas, because my elder child had a salt door decoration and a cracker and a snowman made out of cotton wool balls, and my younger one hasn't got one now to put on the tree. So when we think about, there are skills that we will teach children, there are things that we demonstrate to children, but when the question is, what do you look for in an early years space? There isn't an answer. I don't look for a curiosity cube. I do not look for a muslin teepee. I don't look for a copper kettle, and I don't look for everything to be presented in a wicker basket or a wooden bowl. If they're there and the adults can talk to me about the why, around why they are there, I love that. If they're not there, but the adults can talk to me about the why, the things that are there, I love that. So whenever, for me personally, if I walked into a really high quality early years space, what I would look for is an adult who could talk to me about why their space looked like it did. I wouldn't give two hoots whether it was in a wicker basket or not. If they could say, this space is based on assessment and observation of these children, it meets their needs, it's been structured around their interests, we've got resources that consolidate and extend skill development, we go with children's interests. The role of the adult is to engage, is to inspire, is to delight children in the space, and our children make brilliant progress. That is what I would look for. And I think sometimes I'm getting dead animated now because I feel the pressure of early years practitioners who scroll through Instagram and think, but my space doesn't look like that. If only I had. You know, things like a curiosity cube, which often are about as curious as a brick. I mean, naming no names, but I was in a setting, I mean, there were several settings of curiosity cubes. One setting I was in had 6 Bramley apples under a Perspex cube called the Curiosity Cube. And the discussion that we had in a light-hearted way at the end of the day was, if you can find me a 4-year-old that's curious about 6 apples in a Perspex box, then we can call it a Curiosity Cube. Other than that, it's a bit of a boredom box. Or there was one that was just a stuffed teddy, just sitting, staring out of a cube. And again, it was the Curiosity Cube. And again, we were talking about, if it's a Curiosity Cube, I should literally be nipping my willy with excitement. Obviously not me, but if I was 4, thinking, oh, what's this? Oh, what's in this cube? That's curious. If it's 6 Bramley apples or a stuffed bear, that's not going to happen. So when I'm looking at spaces, I am looking for spaces that are built on children that inhabit them, and that's what I want to see. I don't care whether you've got a Curiosity Cube or not. That'll not make the difference unless it's been put there to make the difference, in which case it will. That was a bit preachy, I apologise.
No, that was perfect. I think we've had that many preach hands go up, and with your Christmas reminiscing, I think the whole audience and myself are having flashbacks. So
it's just horrendous. Having lived as a practitioner. But also, we were in no shouting school, so we had always had big discussions around how you didn't need to raise your voice and da. But Christmas was the only time I ever heard my staff shout other than an emergency, like, sit up, sit down, whoopsie daisy angel, come on, you're on. It was like, or you have year two bursting into the hall and reception, you'd be like, but we haven't finished in year two, but it's my time in the hall. It was just like, we don't need this in our lives. So we didn't.
It's too stressful. It's not fun for anybody, is it really?
Yeah, I'm not saying ban Christmas, but I'm just saying also we are educators, so we're there to educate. I know I've said it before, but like to educate and delight our children. And there is some delight in Christmas for children, and there's some delight in going into the big hall where Father Christmas might be. There's no delight in sitting for 40 minutes on a hard wooden floor singing Little Donkey 23 times with somebody shouting, sing up, I can't hear. There's no delight in that. So I think sometimes we need to be bold and say, right, these children are 4, 5 years old. This is not developmentally appropriate. Let's celebrate Christmas. Let's make it magical. Let's make it special. Let's include the community, but let's do it in a way that's developmentally appropriate for these children. But I get that you've got to be bold. And I was lucky enough to be the head so I could make those decisions. It's hard if you are not in that position. I'm not saying ban Christmas. I love Christmas.
I think most of the comments about it were, yes, but you try telling the parents that. But yeah, we've all been there.
I did, and I wasn't popular for a little while, but they got over it. They did get over it, and then it just became, that's what we did.
Exactly. Just do it. Yeah. So we're going to have one last question here. And this one's from Sophie from Oaks Infant School, and she's asking, how does the OLP model work within the revised framework? What does OLP planning look like with the revised framework in mind?
So OLP planning, for those who don't know, is objective-led planning. So the idea of an OLP plan, very briefly, is that, say you're an adult who would normally say at the end of a carpet session, I'm going to do a maths focus, and I'm going to have my 4 maths groups. I've differentiated them by where they are in their maths journey in this particular focus, and I'll rotate them through my table. So you end up sitting at your table and stopping children and doing the kind of, everybody stop, show me 10 fingers, right, red group, I need red group, all that palaver. The idea of an OLP is that you would still plan the same objective, but rather than pull children out of play to come to your table to do the maths, for example, you take the objective into play. So different settings use OLPs in different ways. Sometimes every adult will have a different objective. Sometimes just one adult's got the objective and the other adults are doing other things. But the idea is not that you go into play and just deliver the objective regardless. So you're not going into every bit of play and saying, right, stop what you're doing. This is what we're doing now. The idea is that as an adult, rather than just wandering through play, which some adults do find they're doing, and saying things like, oh, that's lovely. Oh, I like that. That's a big tall tower. Rather than having to do that and kind of having that's a lovely Tourette's, or often as adults will develop how many Tourette's. So you can't think of anything else to say, so you go around saying, how many bricks are in your tower? How many pom-poms are on your picture? How many? It's like, and children are like, oh, stop asking how many questions. So the idea of an objective-led plan is you would go into the play and think, right, I'm going to the sand tray. I can see these children doing this with the sand. It's got nothing to do with my objective. So I'm going to choose to ignore my objective, but I'm really going to engage with their play. So I'm going to seize this as a teachable moment. I'm going to go in, I'm going to scaffold, I'm going to observe what they are doing. So it's nothing to do with my objective, but it's teachable. So that's one thing you can do. Sometimes you will take your objective into a space and you can deliver it, so you do. And you can differentiate the objective, or you can just deliver it to some children and not to others. And sometimes you will just observe what children are doing and inwardly absorb that observation and move on. So the idea of an objective-led plan is that you deliver the objective through play when it is appropriate. Or sometimes, as we all do, you might facilitate play. So you might go into a space where there isn't anybody, or start in a space and think, well, I'm starting here with a little bit of an engager. And once I've engaged with these children, rather than saying, right, green group go, red group come, I'm going to leave you where you are and I'm going to go off into the rest of the space. So objective-led planning works beautifully with a new framework because you are looking at engaging in the play space And also the good thing, I'm going to stop talking after this, but the good thing about objective-led planning for me is I spent my life as a reception teacher pulling children to my table. Didn't move very much at all. Put on about 1.5 stone because you just sit still all day and eat biscuits in the staff room. But what you do in terms of objective-led planning is you are taking yourself into the domain of the children. So you see more, you hear more, you interact more, you learn more, you teach more. And that makes it a much, much richer experience. So yeah, objective-led planning or OLP works really well.
That's absolutely amazing. Thank you so much, Alistair, for answering as many questions as we could possibly fit into about an hour session. So we have come to the end of the questions, but please do keep an eye on social media because our team will be working in the background to get that this recording available for you. And if you haven't already, you can search for TTS Talking EYFS, and that has some free resources written by the one and only Alistair and other experts on our TTS website.
That's great. And thanks, Kamilla, for doing an excellent job. You should either be on Good Morning Britain or QVC. You do really well on both. And who knows, you didn't see yourself doing this, so maybe in years to come you will be doing that. We should do this every week. It's been great. I've loved it.
Well, I've got to welcome you in, Alistair, so... No, thank you so much
for tuning in. It's been great to see everybody, and yeah, it's fab. And yeah, we'll try and answer those questions that you've asked if we haven't covered them tonight in some way, shape, or form. But yeah, really nice to see everybody, and thanks for inviting me, Kamilla. It's been ace.
You're very, very, very welcome. And for everybody who's asking about it, if you're not on social media, if you sign up to the mailing list, you will get sent the link to watch this video back on demand. So you've got Alistair in your pocket whenever you need.
Oh, what a thought that is.
Thanks so much, everybody. Have a great evening.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Bye.